Warriors dynasty was arguably the most successful 5-year run in modern NBA history. But with recent roster turnover as well as injuries to star players like Klay Thompson, there is a chance that the dynasty has come to an end. There is still hope nonetheless, so let's talk about whether or not they can recover. So I think we're all pretty well aware of just how dominant the Warriors were. 2015 champions, 73-9 in 2016, then they added KD and were on their way to three-peat until injuries struck in the 2019 playoffs. The downfall of the KD era began in the series against the Houston Rockets in 2019 when Kevin Durant initially injured his calf. He sat out for a few games but rushed back to try to help the team win a third straight championship, which ultimately caused him to tear his Achilles in the finals against the Toronto Raptors. That injury would prove to be Durant's last moment as a Warrior, as he would go on to leave in free agency that summer, heading to Brooklyn with Kyrie Irving. Things got even worse though, as Klay Thompson then tore his ACL in the following game, which ended the Warriors' championship hopes for that season, as well as ruled him out for all of the 2020 season. And then, as I mentioned, during that offseason, Kevin Durant did leave for Brooklyn, although they did receive D'Angelo Russell back in a sign and trade. However, there was much uncertainty going into the 2020 season, as Klay Thompson was still injured and there was roster turnover, so nobody really knew what to expect from the team. And it pretty much went to a worst case scenario, as Steph got injured after just a few games and he also had to sit out the entire season. Draymond Green also noticeably regressed, and they pretty much just decided to take a season off and tank for 1 year while their stars got healthy. One of the few bright spots of the season was rookie Eric Pascal, power forward who had a great start to the season and should prove to be a quality backup power forward going into the future. And probably the biggest headline of that season was at the trade deadline, where they traded D'Angelo Russell, who they had just signed, to Minnesota for Andrew Wiggins, as well as Minnesota's 2021 top 3 protected first round pick. And this trade certainly was interesting. Wiggins never really worked out as he was supposed to in Minnesota, but many thought that he may thrive in the Warriors system. So now the question going into next season is just how much can they get out of him? In the 12 games he's played with the Warriors so far, he saw a slight decrease in points per game, but an increase in efficiency. So it seems like he's going to have to adjust to being more of a role player, where he was used to being the second option in Minnesota, and try to blend in more with the rest of the team. Many fans have tried to label him the next Harrison Barnes, but I really don't feel like that's an accurate comparison. Really, the only thing that they have in common is that they're small forwards who will be rotation players for the Warriors. But in terms of their game, I'd say that Barnes is a much more complete player and much better suited in the Golden State system, though Wiggins is still a better player overall. Wiggins is a better shot creator and is more athletic, but Barnes is a better spot-up shooter and a better rebounder. Wiggins has better defensive potential, but Barnes is more consistent than Wiggins on that end of the floor. So just because they play the same position on the same team does not mean that they are going to be the same player. And actually, with Klay Thompson's injury, as well as some roster moves which we'll get to later, it seems like Andrew Wiggins is going to be going back to the shooting guard position this season. And so while in the long term he's going to have to be more of a role player, I feel like this could be a big season for him, as he's going to really be the secondary scorer behind Steph Curry, and he will get more opportunity than he would have if Klay Thompson were healthy. So this really could be a make or break season for him, and obviously it depends how things go, but going into the 21-22 season, I think he may end up being the sixth man if they bring some of the guys they have right now back, and that will allow him to sort of be himself more. He'll get more opportunity and more shots, and have more of the offense run through him coming off the bench. So after the Wiggins acquisition, the Warriors pretty much just tanked their way through the rest of the season. Obviously, the season was cut short in March, and being that they had the worst record in the league, the Warriors were surprisingly not invited to the bubble. So that shifted Golden State's focus to the offseason, where the main topic of discussion was their draft pick. Since they were the worst team in the league, they had the best odds at the number 1 pick, and it had been long rumored that they would draft a center in this draft to try to fill a hole that they've had for a long time in their team's history. They ended up landing the 2nd overall pick in the draft, as Minnesota got the 1st pick, which is kind of ironic considering the Wiggins trade. And as soon as that happened, there were so many rumors about ways that they may try to use the pick. Obviously, there were the people that thought they would just take the simple option and go for a center like Wiseman or Okongwu. There were the people who thought maybe they try to get a guard and commit even more to small ball. Maybe they'll trade down and try to get a better wing guy that could be a better role player like an Isaac Okoro or Denny Avdia. Or what seemed like the most likely option at one time was to try to trade the pick. And there were so many ideas thrown out that I can't really remember them. I know that one of them was Kevin Love, which I always thought was kind of weird. They talked about getting Drew Holiday, maybe Victor Oladipo. There were a bunch of different rumors, but ultimately they did decide to keep the pick. And despite the temptation of adding another great perimeter player, they did make the simple, safe choice and they went for James Wiseman, center out of Memphis, who unfortunately was only able to play 3 games in his collegiate career due to ineligibility with some, let's say, suspicious financial activity. But despite being the simple pick, I think it was the right pick. To many people, this was a top 3 and then the rest type of draft where you have James Wiseman, LaMelo Ball, and Anthony Edwards as the clear top 3, and everyone else is kind of a tier below that. And of those 3, Wiseman is easily the one that fits in with the Golden State Warriors the best. I'm assuming most of you will have knowledge about James Wiseman and his game, but in case you don't, just a quick run through. He is a rim-running, tall, lanky, big man who is very athletic and a good shot blocker. If you're looking for a player comparison, the most common one is DeAndre Jordan, as he is athletic, tall, a good inside scorer, a shot blocker, and a rebounder. But I would argue that he fits the modern game better than DeAndre Jordan. I think he's a little bit better of a perimeter defender. He can handle the ball better, and he has the potential to space the floor, but he's not consistent at the 3 ball yet. So I'd say his career projection is to be like a prime DeAndre Jordan, but with a bit of a twist in him, and that twist is in, you guessed it, Miles Turner. He obviously has those DJ-like qualities that I talked about, but I think he fits in the modern game more similar to Miles Turner. So that was their main pick of the night, but they also did pick up Nico Mannion in the 2nd round, who, in case you don't follow college much, I think he was top 10 in his class. He might have been 11 or 12, and he went to Arizona, and despite showing great scoring potential, he was very inconsistent and inefficient, hence his draft stock lowered a lot. But I think it's a solid selection as he does have an upside, and the Warriors really do need a backup point guard for the future, as they really didn't have a point guard on the roster at that point besides Stephen Curry, as Jordan Poole is more of a 2 guard than a real point guard. And speaking of that backup point guard, they went out and signed Brad Wanamaker, who, similar to Enes Kanter, I hated as a Celtics fan, but I do see how he does fit with the team, as again, they really didn't have anybody besides Curry on the roster, and he is a pretty solid defender, as well as people like to point out, I think the greatest free throw shooter of all time statistically. That's really his main bragging point, but I really don't like him offensively. He provides really nothing in terms of scoring or playmaking, and I really just got nervous every time he had the ball in his hands. But he is an experienced player, he has a very good overseas resume, and he will be the main backup point guard for Golden State this season. And now we move into the last and I think best move of the offseason for the Warriors, and that is the trade for Kelly Oubre. I touched on this in my OKC video, which you should watch if you haven't yet, but that Kelly Oubre trade is an absolute steal for Golden State. You're getting a 24-year-old do-it-all 3/4 who fits in great with any team, and especially with the Warriors, and all you had to give up for him was most likely 2 second-round picks, although there is the potential for it to be a first-round pick if it is in the bottom 10 of the first round. Either way, that comes nowhere close to equaling Oubre's value in my opinion, and if somehow it doesn't work out, he is on a 1-year contract, so you can let him walk and you really didn't have to give up anything. But I do think he will work very well in that system, and I do see him signing a long-term contract there next offseason, and in fact, I think he's the real new Harrison Barnes if anybody is. Position-wise, he's more similar to Barnes, being a 3/4 instead of a 2/3 like Wiggins is. He's a much better off-ball player. He's a better shooter than Wiggins, he's a solid defender, and really he's just a much more overall complete player similar to Harrison Barnes. So it was a relatively quiet offseason for the Warriors. They didn't make any huge moves like people expected them to, but I do think all the moves that they made were good moves, and that's really what's important, isn't it? So coming into this season, they were expected to get back to like the 2015-2016 pre-KD Warriors, where it's more ball movement and better depth and more centered centered around Steph and Klay, but the black cloud that's been following the Warriors for the last year or so struck again, as Klay Thompson will be sidelined for the entire 2021 season with yet another leg injury, this time being an Achilles instead of an ACL. And that is a huge loss. With how good the Western Conference is, it's really going to be tough to compete with Curry being the only real star on the team. They're going to need massive leaps from players like Andrew Wiggins to maybe start to reach his potential, as he still does have room to grow and he is only 25, even though he's been in the league for years. Or they're going to have to rely on rookie James Wiseman to do more on offense than he was initially expected to. And they were granted a disabled player exception. I'm not sure for how much money. I think it was around 9 to 10 million. I'm not too sure if it can be used in trades or not, but basically that just means they'll have the opportunity to sign another valuable player since they unexpectedly lost Klay Thompson. And very biased take here, but I really want them to use that exception on Quinn Cook. Quinn was obviously a member of the Warriors before, as he was part of the 2018 championship before signing with the Lakers in 2019, winning another championship, and then unfortunately being cut. So he's already familiar with the team, and he'll be able to play both the point guard and shooting guard positions, which will be very important as, like I mentioned before, they're really lacking at point guard besides Steph Curry, and obviously they'll need another shooting guard with Klay Thompson's injury. So as I mentioned before, the team at this point is really just Curry and role players. Now, Wiseman and Wiggins do have the potential to be more than role players, but in all likelihood, Steph is going to have to carry this team hard. And if they do reach like a top 4 seed in the West, I could see an MVP season from Stephen Curry. And if we look at the rest of this team, and once again this is the depth chart according to ESPN, they'll be starting Curry, Wiggins, Oubre, Draymond, and James Wiseman, with Wanamaker, Damian Lee, Kent Bazemore, who I forgot to mention that they signed, he's just more scoring depth off the bench, as well as a second year Eric Pascal and Marquise Chris. And then you also have Kevon Looney, who may get minutes, or maybe some of the young guys who played last year will get minutes. And I do really like the starting 5, to be honest. I think it fits pretty well, but again, you're just lacking another star outside of Curry. And in terms of the bench and the depth, I'd say it's pretty average, maybe a little below average. But again, we'll have to wait and see how they use that disabled player exception. And overall, I think this team is just solid. And solid really is not good enough. As I mentioned in my Blazers video, I think the clear top 4 in my eyes in the Western Conference is Lakers clear number 1, then you have Clippers, Nuggets, and Blazers 2 through 4 in any order. And then the fight for those last 4 playoff spots is going to be very intense, as you'll have Golden State, Dallas, Phoenix, Memphis, New Orleans, maybe even Houston. Definitely feel like I'm forgetting somebody here. There's Minnesota. Really just about every team except like the Spurs or maybe the Kings has a chance of making the playoffs in the Western Conference. So it's going to be a very tough fight to make the playoffs, but in the end, I do see Curry bringing them into the playoffs, as it's just hard to imagine a team with prime Steph Curry not making the playoffs. And so this season, they'll at least be competitive, but without Klay, it really just is another throwaway season where they're trying to prepare for next season. I think this team probably goes out in the first round, and they're a second round exit at best without Klay. And I really don't think Klay is going to come back. I know people will be talking about it, but we've seen how coming back too early has hurt that team in the past with Kevin Durant. And it seems like guys in more recent years in the NBA in general are really not taking any chances when it comes to injuries. So once again with the Golden State Warriors, we're already looking to the following season. And we really can't keep doing that for much longer, as Steph is now 32, Klay and Draymond are both 30, and Draymond is already regressing. And they'll all be a year older by the time they're really gonna make a serious run again. So really, they'll only have like a 2 to 3 year window with the current core of Steph, Klay, and Draymond once everybody is healthy. And with all of that said, to answer the question in the thumbnail and the title, I do not think that the dynasty is over just yet. Even with everything that's happened, as long as you still have Steph Curry in his prime, you're going to be able to build a good team around him. And and especially if Klay comes back healthy, which it says he's expected to make a full recovery, even though he might not be as good on the defensive end. With his role, he'll still be nearly the same player that he was before, and that caliber of player is going to be enough to push them into serious contention talks. Now, even if Klay were healthy this year, I still don't think they'd be better than the Lakers, and I'd put them relatively even with the three that I've said before, and that 2 through 4 would become a 2 through 5 that could really be in any order. So I don't think that the dynasty is over, but I do think that the team as we knew it is gone. Obviously, KD is gone. Draymond really isn't himself anymore, although he may pick up form with Steph and Klay back in the lineup. And then guys from before KD like Harrison Barnes, like Andrew Bogut, Quinn Cook even is gone, Iguodala is gone, and outside of the core three and I guess Kevon Looney, it's really an entirely new team. So I don't think that the Warriors dynasty is gone, it's just different. And I do like how they've managed the roster going into the future, as young talents like Wiseman, Kelly Oubre, and even to an extent Wiggins will help to carry the load a bit more as the core guys start to age. And even as they start to age, obviously Draymond is already regressing, but Steph and Klay could have very long primes with their playstyles. As I mentioned before, Klay will probably get a little bit worse on defense, and as they age, Steph won't be as explosive with his handle or as good of a finisher as he is right now, as I feel like that is an underrated part of his game. But one thing they'll always have is shooting, and they are the two greatest shooters of all time in my opinion. We see it with guys like JJ Redick and Kyle Korver. No matter how old you get, if you can still shoot, you still have a place on an NBA roster. So I do think that the play styles of Curry and Klay will extend their primes, and even after their primes, make them useful players very late into their careers if they do get another young star on the team, or Wiseman develops into a superstar himself. Who knows? Maybe Wiggins finally becomes a star. Probably not. But in all seriousness, I do like the way that this team looks going into the future, and I don't think that they're done just yet. And of course, there's always the chance that they go out and make a big move in free agency next offseason, as 2021 free agency is looking even crazier than 2019 free agency. We've all heard those Giannis to Golden State rumors. It could happen, but in the case that we have seen the end of the Warriors, I think that's really terrible for the league and for basketball fans in general. Even though most of us hated the Warriors, especially during the Durant era, can't deny what they did for the league. Even if they ruined the competitive balance, they pushed the game forward, they really innovated and were one of the greatest teams ever. And I do kind of think that the Cavs-Warriors potential dynasty was ruined by Durant's move to Golden State, and I personally would just be really sad to never get to see that 2016 style Warriors team ever again. So Warriors fans, I know things are kind of tough right now, but you guys are pretty spoiled at this point, be honest with yourselves, and I do think there is still hope for you guys going into the future. If you made it to this point in the video, I really do appreciate that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.